was a challenging book. It wasn't the sweet, how do you celebrate all 8 Sabbats book that I was expecting. Alright, my souls, welcome to this video about Thorn Mooney's traditional Wicca. So this book was released in mid-2018, just about, and I read it within about 2 or 3 weeks, I think. And I want to share my thoughts about it, which means I'm going to be talking about who I think this book is for, who I think it may not be for quite yet or not at all, and whether it met my expectations, whether I was disappointed or not, and just give you the general jazz of what this book is all about. So the first thing I want to say before anything else is that, just as I said in my book review of Harmony Nice's Wicca book, I am not a Wiccan myself anymore. I do not consider myself a Wiccan. I consider myself a solitary witch with an eclectic practice. However, I still love reading books about Wicca. I like thinking about the issues that surround it or the themes that surround it and how they go about life, because paganism and Wicca are very linked anyways, and since I do consider myself a pagan, it's still right up my alley. So that is actually one interesting point about this book where I really see its strength. It is discussing a lot of topics that surround paganism and that surround Wicca and witchcraft that a lot of people wonder about. And it is a very academic discussion of those themes. For example, it does talk about why Wicca and paganism are so similar to each other, what happened historically to make it this way, which I didn't know, and I think a lot of people don't know, but always wondered about. And I think she's very good at the whole academic aspect of presenting history and presenting just the discourse that happens in the pagan community, whether it pertains to hierarchy in Wicca, Wicca and paganism and the differences, how Catholicism has shaped our expectations of Wiccan practice, or the difference between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but I wanted to talk about the strength that the book has first and foremost, before I get to the parts that maybe I didn't like so much. So honestly, I was expecting something very different out of this book, but that is not the book's fault. I think that is my own fault because I purchased it rather quickly because I wanted to kind of delve into the Wiccan practice a bit more. And if you saw my video about Harmony Nice's book about Wicca, you will know that I derive a great comfort from reading about Wicca in a very strange way and reading about Wiccan beliefs. Now, the thing is, I was expecting the book to be the 550th book about how to celebrate the 8 Sabbats and how to celebrate Esma and how to, go about the Wiccan way of life. I was expecting this, but I am glad that this expectation was not met, because in the end, it is a much more diverse and more inspiring book the way it is, rather than if it had been about how Gardnerian Wiccans observe the Sabbats or how they go about ritual. That being said, I did also expect some sort of idea of how you set up a group ritual or how you can engage in group ritual maybe, but she doesn't go into that very much. It's not really about how you would found your own coven or how you would go about making your own coven, but it is much more about the kind of serious religious side, where it is about priesthood and lineage and carrying on a tradition that you become a part of by joining a coven. And beyond that, it is not a book that really concerns itself with the question whether a coven is right for you, but rather it is about how you can find a coven. There's a questionnaire at one point in the book where I was thinking like, yeah, I love journaling about these things. It will probably be about whether a coven is right for me, you know, and which I know and knew before I read the book that I do not want to be in a coven, but that has no bearing on any of this, or it probably does in some ways, blah, blah, blah. The point is, I was expecting something different from the questionnaire, and it was basically just about how you figure out what tradition is right for you, whether you are ready for a coven, and how you can find one nearest to you. It wasn't about how maybe solitary practice would be better for you or more beneficial for you. You know, it is a very coven-centric book in that way, which is totally fine because it does concern itself with the frameworks and the societal expectations and the etiquette of finding a coven, which is very, very helpful for people who are looking for one. But then it has this other side that isn't just about finding a coven, but it is about the pagan discourse. And that is the side of the book that I enjoyed a lot more because I'm not looking for a coven. So I am not a seeker in the way in which she defines it. The book basically has two sides to it. You have the side that teaches you about how to find a coven, what to expect from a coven, kind of getting in tune with whether you are ready to even be in a coven, whether you have the stability and the ability to let yourself move into a group setting. And the other side of it is the more general pagan discourses. And that side was definitely more interesting to me personally. I have to really commend her for her very academic approach. I have mentioned in my video about Lisa Lister's witch book that I'm not a big fan of language that tries too hard to be youthful. You know, where it feels like the editor swooped in and was like, can you maybe put in some abbreviations like, by the way, BTW, to make it seem a bit more young, to appeal to this audience that we found in a focus group that might be really interested in your book. You know, that whole logic is not behind this book. It is her authentic writing style. And I'm not saying that Lisa Lister's writing style isn't authentic. It just seems a bit much for me, and it just seems to be catering to a certain kind of mindset that isn't my own, which probably says more about me than Lisa Lister, but I'm going off on a tangent here. The point is that Thorn's writing style is more academic, more serious. She does have her very funny and kind of dry, humorous points. It's not trying to appeal to anyone by sugarcoating things or by not being honest about things. She does show the truth of what it must be like to look for a coven. It's not a one-day thing. It's not a 2-month thing. It's going to take maybe even years for you to find a coven that is right for you. And she is honest about that, but at the same time, she finds the right comforting and encouraging words to make people see the possibilities that it offers to anyone who is interested in covens. I'll be a little bit anecdotal for a second because the things she writes about where it comes to the etiquette of writing to people, writing to a high priestess, asking her whether you can join a coven, or writing to anyone and like finding information about it. You just have to have a certain etiquette and a certain respect. And I could really sense that she has probably had a lot of contact with people who feel entitled to join a certain coven, people who feel entitled to join a certain tradition, and who are almost disrespectful towards people in power, or in power sounds really terrible, but you know what I mean. Higher up people who have a higher standing in that particular tradition. So there was a little bit of bitterness about that, and I found that funny because at work I sometimes read resumes for people who apply. And I do have to say that it feels like Nowadays, a lot of people sadly don't know how to formulate a cover letter. They don't know how to do it in a respectful way. Some people don't even mention the company name in their cover letter without saying, like, this is why I want to work with you. And a lot of what she said about people applying to her coven sounds the same. They probably don't even mention why they want to be in her coven specifically or her tradition. And they show no respect, only entitlement. And in all honesty, like, I am not a person who is all about etiquette and about you have to say thank you have to place the silverware in a certain way on a dining table, or you can't talk with food in your mouth or something. It's not that kind of etiquette. I don't care about that. But it is just a simple fact of life that if you want something from someone, especially if you want to join a coven or find a job, your chances are going to increase significantly if you make them feel respected and show them why you are someone that they would want to work with. You know what I mean? And I really loved that she mentioned this, and it sort of made me think of job interviews and that whole jazz. But anyways, that was my little anecdote. And yeah, I like her writing style. So I want to go over some specific points in her book that really interested me. When I first read the index, I was definitely interested in the chapter about hierarchy, about lineage, and about the history of Wicca, and also orthodoxy and orthopraxy, shadows that might surround community and covens. So I was surprised that it looked a lot different, the index, but as I got into it, I was very intrigued by what she would have to say. So the first thing I want to talk about briefly, I already mentioned it, history. She talks about why Wicca and paganism are similar. That is a great read and very, very interesting. And I think that's something I don't want to say people should know because nobody has to know anything, but it's definitely helpful to put your own practice into context. Then about priesthood and how serious in a way covens are, because at least in traditional Wicca, it is about self-exploration, of course, but it is also about dedicating yourself to something bigger than you, to your lineage, to your coven's traditions, to the paths, traditions that you are walking. In her case, that is Gardnerian Wicca. And dedicating yourself to this is a completely different framework from how I and a lot of other witches or Wiccans explore the world, which is very focused on the self, on self-exploration. Of course, it also has communal aspects where you engage with the pagan community or you do community work that doesn't necessarily pertain to witchcraft, but volunteering and helping others in a way that brings you further on your path without being specifically witchy. Of course, that is part of it, but it's not in the same way as doing a group ritual is and dedicating yourself to be an actual priestess or priest. And then there are the shadows that she talks about that surround being in a coven or being in such a tightly knit community. And I loved that part because it got me thinking about the own shadows that I have with community, which pertain mostly to, being yourself authentically and being honest with your opinions, allowing for deep connections with other people. There are also other shadows like having respect for others, listening to others, competitiveness. All of this can, if they are on the shadow side of things, where you are too competitive, you try to be better than others, or you're not really listening to others, but talking all the time. All of these sorts of issues that surround our relationships with community were incredibly interesting to me and very inspiring. It really poked my shadow. So if you want a book that pokes your shadows and your fears about community and about covens, then this is definitely the perfect book. What I also found an incredibly interesting thought was how Catholicism shaped everybody's expectation of Wiccans to be very belief-focused. Because in Catholicism, your relationship to God, your faith, your religion, your belief, that is the central aspect of Catholicism. And Wicca is a lot more practical than that in a lot of ways. And I think many people expect Wiccans to have just a strong belief system like Catholicism, and that's it, you know. And in that way, I found it very interesting that she makes it okay to say, you don't have to have the same beliefs as your coven mates. In her coven, not everybody believes the same thing. What connects them is the practical aspect and their group practice. The chapter about orthodoxy versus orthopraxy was also supremely interesting, wherein she talks about, of course, there is a difference between practice and belief, but especially in Wicca, they are intrinsically linked. I think in anything, they are linked. The way you see the world and perceive the world, the thought systems and the framework of mind that you work with always influences your everyday life. It influences your spiritual practice, how you go about your life in general, and how you perceive yourself. And kind of separating them into orthodoxy and orthopraxy makes sense, of course, on a very academic level, but it is important to keep in mind that they are always connected. Now, the most problematic chapter for me personally was hierarchy. She speaks about this topic because obviously a lot of people who have issues with covens or with traditional religion or traditional Wicca have an issue with the system that there is someone above you who's telling you what to learn. Some of the aspects that she addresses in defense of this system make sense to me. She says that being a teacher or being above someone doesn't mean that you tell them what to believe. It means that you guide them on their way to finding out what their belief is, but at the same time sort of keeping it in alignment with the tradition that they are practicing and that they dedicated themselves to. I'm a little torn on this because she compares it to schools and how in school you have a teacher and you have students because that just makes sense, you know. It makes sense to have someone who guides you in your path of study. But at the same time, I think it creates a system, and of course this is something that a lot of countries are changing in their education system right now. It creates a system where students become very determined to please the teacher basically and to go down the path that the teacher suggests. So even if a teacher says to you, hey, sit down, meditate, and find out what's right for you, you're still going to always have the teacher in the back of your head. At least that is how it is for me. In a perfect world, of course, you would be all on your own, but you know, you can never underestimate how receptive people, especially young people, if you are teaching students, are to your worldviews and your opinions. So even just anything you say, they soak it up like a sponge. I think in school, as well as in probably covens, it is a very thin line and a tough line to walk between inspiring the students to go about their own beliefs and to find their own path and influencing them to walk a certain path. Because even if you decide what a student should study, you are already influencing them. If you tell them to go into a specific direction and study something because you think it will be good for their growth, that is still you influencing them. And for me personally, that doesn't work in my spiritual practice because it is much too individualistic for that. But at the same time, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. I think every student has to find their own way of dealing with this. And if you are a 30-year-old woman who is becoming an initiate, then you are probably strong enough in your core from having been in school and having experienced it to know what is right for you and to take what the teacher says as encouragement, not as what you have to believe. So I just want to say that the jury is still out on what education system, even for schools, is the best. And nowadays it has shifted so much already from someone just being in the front and talking to you to students basically of all ages being put in the same class and learning amongst themselves and the teacher not even speaking all that much. And I think a lot of countries, especially Nordic countries, are experimenting with these approaches, and it's working a lot better to have less guidance for the students in a way. And I don't want to have a final verdict on this, but it is just something that I feel I had to address, because I don't think that hierarchy in all cases can be justified by saying that someone else is higher up than you, and that is why they can help you. I know that it makes sense pertaining to a certain tradition or lineage, because obviously they know more than you about Gardnerian Wicca, but you may know more than them about life, about wisdom, about universal knowledge. And it must be a hard line to walk, but Thorn does seem like a very careful and discerned person when it comes to educating people. So I feel like she probably has found a good path. I just think that there are a lot of traditions out there and a lot of covens who may have issues with this and who may have teachers that aren't entirely great and know how to walk this line of not influencing people too much, but just enough, you know what I mean? But she does cover that in the book as well. She talks about the negatives and the issues that you can encounter when you find a coven, and that you shouldn't let anyone tell you what to do, what to believe, and that as soon as you notice a red flag, you should probably not engage with that coven anymore if it doesn't work for you. But at the same time, it should be a challenge. And she finds a good balance between encouraging and warning in this case, I think. So my final thoughts on the book. Who is it for? Would I recommend it? I think it is for people who are either specifically searching for a coven and want help and encouragement in finding this coven, or if you are someone who is interested in traditional Wicca in general and the discourse that surrounds the pagan community, then the book might be for you too. The very specific parts about how to write an email or how a coven meeting might look to give you more security and to take away the anxiety, those parts might not be interesting for you if you are in the second category. But I would say that to me, it was still a worthwhile read, even though I'm not looking for a coven. And just seeing the very detailed explanations she has, like who might be bringing toilet paper to a coven meeting, or who might be bringing food, or, you know, how it all works out in the nitty-gritty. It gives a lot of safety and takes away a lot of anxiety for people who might be insecure in social scenarios. So generally, even though I am not the target audience, it was still a good read. And her academic approach to orthopraxy, orthodoxy, all of the theologian things that surround it was very, very interesting. What I was missing a little bit maybe was something like the pros and cons of being in a coven versus being a solitary witch, and kind of telling you which parts you can cover on your own and which parts are best done in a coven. At the same time, I read a lot of books about solitary practitioner, and obviously in those they don't always address that you should find a coven or what it's like in a coven. So I don't think in her book she should have to address what it is like to be completely solitary. And it is nothing she can probably speak of because she is in a coven, and that informs her personal practice as well. So I understand why that wasn't included. It's very encouraging in its honesty. It's not lying about the slow process of finding a coven and the complications, but it is still honest and encouraging you to still try and work on those shadows that you may have surrounding community. So I hope you enjoyed this. I have some other book reviews about witchcraft and Wicca. I will link those below. If you choose to dwell in my domain a little longer and subscribe, that would make me very happy. And yeah, let me know if you've read the book, what you thought about it. I haven't seen an awful lot of reviews about it. I have seen Cute Witch 772 speaking about it, and she was very happy about the pagan discourses that Thorn touches on, which I completely agree with. But she was much more aligned with Thorn's opinions than me. But that doesn't matter, you know, everybody has their own opinions. And yeah, I really enjoyed the book. I have to say, it was a challenging book. It wasn't the sweet, how do you celebrate all 8 Sabbats book that I was expecting. But in that, it surpassed my expectations. It was the book that I needed to read, that I didn't know I needed to read. If that sounds really clickbaity. I'm not going to make that the title of the video. Maybe I will. Anyways, I hope you have a great day and enjoy whatever you are reading, and I'll see you all next time.